Let us look at an important hypothesis which is called Claw hypothesis. Claw is nothing but the four name of the scientists which proposed this hypothesis, who are Charlson, Lovelock, Andrew and Warren in 1987. So here they generally talk about how the aerosols affect the climate change. So they had given a hypothesis. We will look at the explanation or the main thing what they had proposed. What they have said is the major source of cloud condensation nuclei over the ocean appears to be dimethyl sulfide, which is actually produced by planktonic algae in the seawater, and this oxidizes in the atmosphere to form sulfate aerosol. Because of the reflectance, that is albedo of the clouds, which is sensitive to cloud condensation nuclei density, biological regulation of the climate is possible through the effect of temperature and sunlight of phytoplankton population and dimethyl sulfide production. What they simply said is, if there is more temperature or if the water is getting warmer, that leads to more algae production of dimethyl sulfide, which produces more sulfate particles or aerosols, which produces more cloud, which reduces the temperature. So this is what is the Claw hypothesis they have proposed. We will see the schematic representation of this one, and here is the schematic representation of the Claw hypothesis. Solar radiation is being absorbed by ocean water. So this leads to enhanced phytoplankton growth, which produces more dimethyl sulfide, and this dimethyl sulfide enters the atmosphere. So here it gets oxidated, and then at the elevated sulfur dioxide concentration, this leads to more cloud condensation nuclei formation. We had earlier seen sulfate particles actually have a cooling effect. So that means when they are part of the cloud, there is more cloud which is cooler in nature. In other words, this gives a negative feedback loop. In other words, when more temperature is there, leads to cooling of the atmosphere. So this is what is the Claw hypothesis mainly talks about. And of course, there is a contrary to the Claw hypothesis, there is also another anti-Claw hypothesis which talks about a positive feedback. So in this one, what happens is, there is a more sunlight now reaching ocean water. So the ocean water leads to decreased phytoplankton growth, because as the temperatures are higher, the phytoplanktons actually die. So that is what they proposed, and this leads to decreased DMS production. When there is less DMS production, that leads to decreased SO2 concentration, which leads to fewer cloud formation, which leads to less number of cloud droplets. So in other words, when the temperature is more, less cloud is being formed. So this is what is called the anti-Claw hypothesis. And this is now, when more temperature is there, then the cloud formation is less. So that means warming takes place. So this is a positive feedback loop. And we can also look at the non-sea salt sulfates. The main sources of non-sea salt sulfate include oxidation of dimethyl sulfide to sulfur dioxide, then further oxidation to sulfuric acid, and then condensation onto the pre-existing particle, which leads to the cloud condensation nuclei, and this leads to formation of new clouds. So this is one of the mechanisms by which the non-sea salt sulfate is responsible for the formation of cloud droplets. And when we talk about dimethyl sulfide, this is getting converted to methane sulfonic acid. The hypothesis is similar to this. The retreating sea ice leads to more algal bloom, which leads to, because retreating sea ice means the sea can get heated up by water, because when there is less ice, what happens is the water gets more sunlight, which leads to more algal bloom, or the temperature increases in the water, which leads to more DMS emission, which leads to more particulates of MSA. So this is what is the Claw hypothesis. And the trends and studies, what people had understood is, there is a significant increase in the dimethyl sulfide emission 70 degree north. So this is what people had observed. So in other words, when there is more higher temperature, that leads to algal bloom, which leads to higher production of dimethyl sulfoxide. and dimethyl sulfoxide gets oxidized further to methane sulfonic acid. This is one of the most intensively studied component present in aerosol. Methane sulfuric acid is the oxidation product formed from dimethyl sulfide, which is derived from marine algae. So it is associated with the presence of open water, that means marginal CI zones. Nutrient sunlight are responsible for the DMS production by the algae and is reflected in the annual cycle. The highest methane sulfonic acid peaks are confined to spring when southerly air mass transport methane sulfonic acid from productive waters in the mid latitudes. So some of the organic sulfur compounds and radicals involved in the oxidation of dimethyl sulfide and dimethyl sulfoxide are given here. Methyl mercaptan, methane sulfonic acid, methyl thiol radical, dimethyl sulfide, methyl thioperoxy radical, and other important species and intermediates are given here. All of these are actually part of the cycle in which dimethyl sulfide is converted into methane sulfonic acid. So here is a complete chart which explains the various radical and ionic reactions involved in the complete conversion. So here is our main dimethyl sulfide. This undergoes various reactions like OH here means OH radical is there, or OH and NO3 gas may be present there. So these DMS undergoes either addition reaction or abstraction reaction that leads to various intermediates as shown here, and many of this transformation finally leads to methane sulfonic acid as shown here. This is the simplified reaction scheme for the OH and nitrate radicals initiated oxidation of dimethyl sulfide. The dashed line basically represents channels that are uncertain. That means how these transformations are taking place, we are currently not sure. But because it is so complicated, people are trying to understand each and every step very carefully to identify how dimethyl sulfide is getting converted to methane sulfonic acid, which is one of the important component in the short-lived climate forces. Various scientific studies had been carried out to study the particulate, that is the methane sulfonic acid trends, and their findings are shown here. Sharma et al., Lang, and many scientists had involved in these studies, and how they studied and what their observations are given here briefly. So in one of the studies they have found out that 4% annual increase in the methane sulfonic acid, that is from July to August between 1998 to 2008 is the one they have observed, and this reflects natural variability rather than sea ice retreat. So that is where one of the studies shows that there is no relationship between sea ice retreat and the climate change. In 2013, Lane reported that there is a strong correlation with monthly sea surface temperature anomalies, that is 30 degree west to 80 degree east and 40 to 90 degree north. He had shown that there is a strong correlation. So Bakagi had mentioned that there is a complex relationship with retreating sea ice. So that means some of the people propose different types of mechanisms and the hypothesis of the relationship between the particulate methane sulfonic acid and the climate change. This clearly tells that there is more understanding required to learn what is the effect of methane sulfonic acid on the climate change.